The gentleman from Florida, Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Geithner. Great to see you here today. Last week, Friday, I had the opportunity to speak to the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, and of course, there were a lot of local community bankers that were there. And again, the reoccurring theme always seems to be, we want to provide that access to capital, but we're seeing an increase of regulation. We're seeing more examiners coming down. They really don't understand things going on here on the ground and that relationship. And in the 6 short months that I spent here, I've learned that in Washington, D.C., if it's worth reacting to, it's worth overreacting to. So I'm just wondering, is anyone at the Treasury going back maybe now and looking at the Dodd-Frank law and looking at maybe the potential negative impacts that we could find on small businesses and those community banks? The large banks have these huge staffs. They can take care of these things. But the small banks and that relationship with small business, is it a possibility we can go back and review Dodd-Frank?
Well, I think you're raising a really important question, and I agree that the main challenge in thinking about regulation is how to get the balance right. Mm-hmm. And it's obvious, looking back at the financial crisis, we got a whole bunch of things wrong as a country and how much oversight we put over the banking system, and we have to fix that. Mm-hmm. And that's what Dodd-Frank was designed to do, but we have to be careful we don't overdo it. I completely agree with you. I do not believe that, well, let me say it affirmatively. I think Dodd-Frank was very carefully designed to make sure that small businesses were not the object of a huge increase in regulation or a meaningful increase in regulation. In fact,
but there's a little collateral damage that has happened.
Well, it's a good question. I think that they were largely protected, insulated from the core provisions of the Act. The Act was really designed at the big failures by large institutions and markets, and that's why I just want to read you this quote from Cam Fine when the bill was passed. Cam Fine, as you know, chairs the Independent Community Bankers Association. He said that Dodd-Frank recognizes the two distinct sectors within the financial services spectrum, Main Street community banks and Wall Street meta banks, broadly supportive of the Act, doesn't agree with everything in it, but it recognizes the efforts of many people on the Hill to make sure that small banks were not subject to an unfair and unnecessary burden as we try to fix the big failures in the system. But I agree with you that we want to be very careful that we don't overdo it. Yeah. And I think that the bigger challenge, I think, apart from just the uncertainty facing banks and business across the country, is that I think examiners, there's just some natural tendency. These are human beings. They want to make sure they're erring on the side of caution now, and we want to make sure they don't overcorrect.
Well, but I think that as we go forward, let's just make sure, as you just said, that sweet spot, kind of like on a baseball bat, we need to find that right position as far as this regulation. Next question I had is, when we look at this small business lending fund, and you just talked about how many thousands of banks we have out there, but how many are looking to or using this fund, did we really have a bottom-up process by going out, talking to the SBA, talking to some small business leaders, community banks, as far as what would you like to see us tailor this fund to be so that it could be a bottom-up process and maybe not a top-down driven process?
Very good question. And, it took 9 months for Congress to react to the initial proposals we made and reshape them and ultimately legislate them. 9 months is a long time with a country facing this degree of challenge in the financial sector. And during those 9 months, not just we, but your predecessors and other people in the committee spent a lot of time talking to states with experience in these programs, to community banks and business about what would be the most powerful set of packages. And I'm sure we didn't get it perfect, but what we all tried to do was take the best mix of things that would command the most support up here. Mm-hmm. We're trying a lot of different things. Roosevelt said in the Great Depression, he said, if I'm not mistaken, what the country needs is bold experimentation, and we are experimenting with the best mix of things we think will help mitigate it. It's not going to make it easy for everybody caught up in this mess, but we thought we were taking the best mix of ideas that could command the most support up here.
Okay. Last thing I'll say is from a lot of people down in South Florida where we still have some double-digit unemployment and incredible foreclosure problems, please remember that small businesses operate as corporations from personal income tax rates when you start talking about raising taxes. Thank you very much. I yield back.
I absolutely will remember that, and you're making a good point.